Leaving behind Book 4 of the Aeneid and all that nasty business with Dido, we take quite a turn in the events of our story in Book 5. We have our hero Aeneas moving from the northern coast of Africa and Carthage and this background that he sees in Dido and her civilization and the dangers of maybe getting implicated in there and his escape from there. We now are going to move on to the future, literally. We're moving on to Rome and what's going to happen next. Sicily provides a kind of perfect medial space in between those two locations, Northern Africa and Italy. It's in the middle in terms of geography. It's right there. It's also an island, so it's somewhat separate from the rest of the world. It also recalls, interestingly, another island that we know from our mythic background of Scheria, where Odysseus had an engagement in a similar kind of activity that we see most characteristic in Book 5. That is, the games in honor of, in this case, in honor of Anchises. These athletic games that Virgil positions in his epic right at this point have really interesting connections with the athletic games that show up, especially in Book 8 in the Odyssey, and allow us to make some interesting kinds of connections. The differences are as profound and interesting as the similarities, but there are ways in which these things bear some comparison. Remember, in Odysseus's case, he is finding a way to reintegrate himself back into society. He's been isolated and alone for a long time in the story. He's been far away on the island of Ogygia and trying to find his way back to his own home. The island of Scheria gives him a medial position in which he can rest, rejuvenate, recover his strength, and move forward. It also gives him a way to, in a final sense, recover the fullness of his identity. And recall in books 5 through 7, he's starting to recover that sense of who he is. He gets back some of his strength and starts to show his wits about him. And then he recovers that and displays that physical strength through these funeral games. This is another piece in him piecing himself back together such that in books 9 through 12, he can take over as captain of the poem and carry forward in the narrative and move things forward for us there. Now, for Aeneas, the medial position is very much similar. He's moving from a state of having been in a state of wandering and not quite sure where he's going into a state of much stronger surety. As he moves to the coast of Italy via Sicily, he's going to enter into a new part of the epic. We're going to close a look at Book 6, which is him going to the underworld, a further detour. But this spot in Book 5 is a transition time as he's moving to Italy. And in Book 7 and forward, the part that we're not reading for this part of the course, Aeneas's action takes place as it's a militaristic conquest of territory, a very definite task that takes courage and strength, but it is, has more definitive parameters around it. Up till now, it's been a lot of wandering and moving around in unclarity, uncertainty, as Aeneas tries to find his way. So the games are a transition into a time when Aeneas is now going to become a more powerful figure in his own right. Now, there are structural ties in this book to the rest of the story. They're quite interesting to note. There are ominous fires that bookend both sides of the games. Remember Dido's funeral pyre just before we get onto the games? We can see that far off the coast. And then after the games, we have the fires of the ships that are being burnt. The Trojan women set them under Juno's encouragement, and we see those fires. They close the games. Both of these have ominous, portentous kinds of meanings to them. There's a storm that we see at the beginning that drives the fleet to Sicily, and another storm at the end puts out the flames on the burning ships. We have this figure Palinurus. He shows up at the beginning of the book as the ship gets through the storm to Sicily. He's the steersman that gets it carefully through that treacherous path. And then Palinurus appears at the end of the story as he falls off the ship. We're going to meet him. Who knew that there was a dead colleague that fell off of our ship? We're going to find out in the underworld, interestingly. Another hearkening back to an interesting theme in the Odyssey. We're going to meet up with Palinurus again. At least we'll hear about him again. Now, the games that get worked out in Book 5 show us lots of pieces of Aeneas's character coming to the fore. There are in the games a boat race, a foot race, boxing, archery, and the equestrian maneuver of the Lusus Troiae. These are different than what we see in the Greek games. There are some similarities, but also some distinctive Romanness that's built into these. We see people in the games who are constantly cutting corners. They're making mistakes. They're being greedy. They're not living up to their potential. They're whining. Those who are engaged in the games are doing all kinds of things that require correcting. Well, as these events show themselves, who's the corrector-in-chief who shows up? It's Aeneas. He starts to step into his role now as a strong commander with a strong hand on the tiller of his ship, guiding his people through difficult conflicts. As was the case when we look back at the Odyssey, we see important pieces of Odysseus' character being put on display there. Well, here we see Aeneas growing into important pieces of his character that are going to be central for him as he moves forward. He gives a chance to display a new kind of prowess that he has. In that sense, there's a parallelism with Telemachus as much as there is with Odysseus as well. His father is now gone, sadly, but with that figure out of the way, Aeneas now is his own, steps into his own as being a prominent and powerful person at the height of his own capabilities in Book 5. We see him settle disputes. He's very good at this as people engage in the games. There are conflicts that arise. Aeneas finds ways to settle disputes. He has judgment and fairness that he brings to bear. He has good offices that he's earned through surviving these awful toils and bringing his people through all this nasty stuff that they've been through. And now he puts them to use in finding ways for people to move forward, even through conflict, and to settle disputes. He steps right into the center of that and takes over in order to help make things work out right for society. One of the markers, I think, of taking responsibility, it's another way of saying solving other people's problems. And Aeneas is stepping right up and doing that kind of thing throughout this book. There's, after he intervenes and solves things, we see lots of goodwill that shows up. There are prizes all around. Aeneas is very generous. He puts them all over. He makes people feel good about themselves. And in each of these situations, the epithet that gets put out more and more frequently with Aeneas in this book and then forward from here in the epic is Father Aeneas. He starts to be referred to in these games as Father Aeneas, more so than any other book in the epic. In fact, Book 5 is where he shows this epithet of himself and shows himself having earned it. Aeneas is now making a transition from this time of wandering and difficulty, such as we see in the journeys and all the turmoil that came with those from Carthage and forward, and now making a turn to Italy. That he does this via Sicily, and a final historical note is important. We have talked already about the Carthaginians and the important role that they played in Roman history. Sicily was a critical piece of the whole Carthaginian struggle, the struggle against the world of Carthage. So the connection there would have been deeply ingrained in Roman minds of Sicily as a pathway between Carthage and Rome, and now being backtracked by Aeneas himself as he is bringing from Carthage this determination to found a new city that will eventually make Dido's funeral pyre go far away and distant and eventually flicker out as Rome comes to dominate the Mediterranean.